at the same time. Okay, so here's how it is. So every time I do a new batch of things, it all comes very randomly and sort of synchronistically and kind of in a clump or a burst. Like suddenly I'm recording 4 or 5 conversations, which is kind of like a season of episodes, right? You know? And I wasn't planning on that at all. It was just like things started to like come together, and I started to think of, okay, so what am I interested in showing, modeling, if this is the last batch of podcasts I ever do? Because I'm at that point with my health and things where like it's getting to a point where like I don't know. I can't really plan like 2 years out, three. I just can't be like, oh, I want to do this thing. It's like, no, there's no, that's just foolish at a certain point. It's just setting myself up for heartbreak and disaster. But what I was interested in after I saw you do your sort of artist ritual presentation thing, um, was sort of modeling and showing how you like how we communicate, like how you and I communicate, which is actually quite different than like most people communicate with me. Like there's just a way that you communicate with me that is like extremely refreshing personally. It's like so like liberating in a certain sense, like like just for my own heart there's something there that like I can't really explain it to other people. I'm like, okay, so I have this friend in Canada named Cheryl, and she talks this certain way. She has this process that is really useful, and I wish more people would do it. Uh, you know, so like part of it is like, well, could we show that in a way that was like as honest as possible, in given the circumstances that we're in, using Zoom and all this nonsense, kind of like can we do that? And that was like one of my questions. And then to sort of the second question is a wondering together about where this communication style could go if it was allowed to go there. You know what I mean? Like if this thing that you do, that we do, was allowed to sort of shake off the costume that it currently wears with its certain names and certain groups that use it in certain contexts, right? Like it has all these things it's already doing, right? But if the spirit of the work itself was allowed to um, shapeshift or change modes or outfits, um, for me, that's where I get a little like teary eyed because I'm like, there are these spirits that people catch or that come to them, and then they become a thing, like a system, right? They become like a system, and that system is kind of like a little cult, and everyone knows, oh, it's all the little cults we have in the world, the NVC cult and the fucking circling, authentic relating cult, like it's just like whatever. But this particular one seems to have the least baggage, and I think it's partially because you're transmitting it from your heritage and lineage, which is useful for me to sort of feel it from a different angle, you know,
Mm,
because when I see it wearing its costume in those other places with those other groups, I'm extremely turned off by it. Like I don't find a place for my heart in there. Like I feel very like, oh, very suspicious and very like, I don't know what this doesn't really sound like the thing that it is, because when I do it with you or with someone else who can really, do something similar, it's almost like a different thing. And I'm
mm,
like, this is fascinating. It's fascinating, like what happens, like the how instructions get translated through different social norms and games that people play socially. And so I just wanted to sort of wonder out loud with you about that, put that in the kind of basket and it doesn't have to get answered, but those were two of my like kind of intentions or needs or wants around like filming a conversation with you. It's like those sort of blobs. And I also know that the conversation has a life of its own, will go where it wants to go, and that's beautiful. But those were sort of like my reasons for being like, hey Cheryl, do you want to like film one of our conversations? You know? So I don't know. I just want to explain that for you and for everyone.
Mm, thank you. I'm very charmed, but I want to attribute some of me being charmed by every time you kind of bob around, the your background doesn't fully follow you. So it looks like there's this like kind of like white shape that's just like constantly chasing you. And I'm really appreciating its presence in this call right now.
Great. Yeah. The sort of extra of the tech creates like this extra partner or something, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's your what some might call your auric field, but I like it as like a random technological phenomenon that's giving me a lot of joy.
Great.
Um, yeah, I mean, then let's do what we normally do.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's just drop in. Um, yeah, let's drop in.
So part of me like doesn't want to interrupt. Like that's always the thing with this. It's like I can just get lost in the kind of meditation, and that's fine. But I wanted to sort of share that when I sit in this space with you, I think it's particularly something that has just arisen from our conversations, is like I really feel like it's very like Star Trek for me. Like it's very much like this wide open galaxy of possibilities and planets, and this kind of ethos of like Star Trek to sort of boldly go where no one has gone before, to seek out new worlds and new civilizations. And the thing that was like really getting me was like like because you say this a lot, like you let's drop in, like it's kind of funny and it's kind of like a parody of yourself on some level, but it's also like what you might say if you were like the captain of a Star Trek ship. Like they all have like a phrase to go to warp. Like it's all you set in the coordinates, and you like everyone looks at the captain. The captain has like a catchphrase, right? Engage or make it so or something. Um, and every new captain has to have like a different one, and it's like this whole thing. It's tradition, right? But the thing I'm saying is like it's interesting to be like if that was your like Star Trek captain like phrase, let's drop in, like let's drop in, and then I don't know, it just tickled me because there's something sort of like adventurous about it if it's not so serious, right? Like we're just dropping in again into this space cocoon that we're flying around in. Um, and for me, I think there's just a lot of heart delight in being able to have a conversation with somebody who also is like very interested in that sort of ethos, exploring and like asking questions, but like not for like any like, maybe it's a grand reason, maybe it's a mystical reason. But the point being is it's kind of just like scientific curiosity. It's like, what's over here? like, oh, I see a bunch of red dots on the tricorder. It's like, well, where's the tricorder? It's like, I don't know. It's somewhere in my nervous system. Um, and for me, the adventure of doing that is a lot like the adventure of improvisation in theater. It's like you're all
Mm.
on this stage, and the stage is this kind of unknown holodeck. And then suddenly you populate the holodeck, and it just starts living, and you just interact. Okay. And for me, that freshness is this kind of taste that I'm constantly seeking out in reality. This like, can people actually just enter into a space together from this fresh vantage point and then go forward together? And obviously they can leave at any time, but you create a space in which like this is this zone, like we're in a spaceship now, and so we're gonna go to this planet. Okay, like I have enough to go on now. Um, so for me, this thing about the ability of genre fiction, like the ability to dream, the ability to sort of create what hasn't been created before, to draw what hasn't been drawn before, to play with what hasn't necessarily been played before. Those are all very energizing for me. Like they're very like buoyant capacities. And I just feel like when we when you're like, let's drop in and we sit in that meditative space, you're not telling me to meditate. So I get to do all these other things. I get to
Mm.
meditate, but I also get to do this other thing that maybe most people don't think of as meditation, right? And I'm really fascinated, like just, I'm going to stop here in a second, but I'm just, because even for me, meditation in the West has become like this lead weight in the water on some level. Like, let's meditate. It's like we already think we know what that's fucking gonna do. Whereas, like, if you said, well, let's just like pause and be stillness, but like dream into the stillness. Well, suddenly it's like so much different than meditation. But I'm like, isn't it the same fucking thing? Like when I meditate, I'm essentially dreaming into stillness and then shit happens. Um, and it gives me the permission to talk about these things that are, in some ways separated in society. Oh, there's dreaming and there's lucid. It's like, yeah, I don't fucking get it. I don't get it. It's all play to me. It's all like weird sensory improv. Um, but I just love the feeling of like, oh, if I know that I'm gonna sit with Cheryl, we're gonna go on a weird Star Trek adventure, and it's gonna be dope, and we don't know what's gonna happen. Last time it was like cosmic space whales and black holes. Great, let's go. I don't care. Um, it just fills me up with some kind of not necessarily a promise or anticipation, maybe. There's a kind of, there is something there, though. It has this kind of feeling of like lifting the heart in some way.
Hmm. Yeah, there is, you know what, I want to start with the image that arose just as we dropped in, which every field that I enter, which is made of relationship, is very, very, it's like it has its own climate and kind of like ecozone. It's like it has its own smell, it has its own kind of like weird plants and living beings indigenous to it. So it's really fun because there is like a way in which when we drop in, it's like there's like a very, I don't know, like when I drop in with you, there is almost like an, I want to say like anti-gravity sensation to it. It's like dropping in and then just being kind of like suspended and falling at the same time. And then like everything just flipped over. And then and then it's like is
Yeah.
up, down, is like um yeah, it's very, there isn't even like, I think dropping also has this yeah, like there's the directionality that's kind of intuitively wrapped into like the words metaphysics or something. It's like dropping has this kind of Alice in Wonderland, you're kind of falling through the rabbit hole. But I do, but sometimes it's like the dropping in is like, I've kind of, there's like this little circle and it's like I drop in and then suddenly it just goes like, it's like this whole, I don't know, just
Mhm.
so many different.
Right.
Yeah. And then I guess like where I go is so swift, actually. It's like riding light.
Mhm.
And the place that I went to was and I'm still here, is there's like immediately this image of um like these like little, almost like, have you watched Howl's Moving Castle?
I believe I have. It's been a while. Yeah.
So it's like a Ghibli movie about, basically about like magicians and the power of magic and so on and so forth. But there's this amazing, I don't know, there's a scene that just like came up, which is when I think the main character kind of like receives magic from this daemon, essentially, that falls like a comet from the sky.
Yeah.
There's a scene where like there's all these spirits that start dancing around him, and they're all like, I don't know, they're very jolly, but there's something kind of sinister about them at the same time. And there's this kind of like, it sounds like children singing, like just like children singing in a kind of sinister way. And then they're all just dancing around him in a circle. And it
Yeah.
was, I was just noticing, oh, like the sinister, like children sprites are here right now.
Yeah. I
And
love
just
those
dancing around
guys.
us.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel like they're the only thing that, I mean, those beings are real, just FYI. Like, those are real beings. Those are not imaginary,
yes.
but yeah, no, totally. It's really real. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
fun.
and they're laughing. They're just laughing. It's
They're
very,
just
very,
laughing.
they're
Yeah.
just laughing.
They're just laughing, and you don't know whether to be freaked out or like be like, "Well, let's join the party, I guess. I don't fucking know what's happening."
Yes. Yeah, because otherwise it's like you can get paralyzed. It is or hypnotized. You can also, if you're not moving with, it's kind of like
Yeah.
There's this way in which it's just circling and circling and circling, and then yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
lose center.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then the other thing, I was is it's like a little like napkin sketch, but there was also this like
Oh,
sense of
yeah. Yeah. I love it.
yeah, there's also this sense of like a tower, but like a lighthouse, and then this lighthouse is beaming like rainbow projections, but like just very, very vivid projections, but the little sprites are like beaming right back. So they're just like kind of like
Oh,
creating these little feedback loops of this lighthouse that's beaming outwards, and then these little sprites that are just like beaming right back. And I was,
yeah.
yeah, and I was kind of like, oh, everything in between is what we think is reality.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. 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 We're somewhere right there in like cloud formation XY2 of like this beam collision over here. Like, and then like past is actually over there. And oh wait, it's just time doesn't make any sense. Um, mhm. I'm very curious when you see these images. You see these images, so like I see images too. I don't necessarily like talk about them or go into them in great detail, and I suppose I should examine why or what I'm afraid of with that. But
Mm.
with you, you do it and you don't ask permission to talk about it, and you don't need to protect me from your seeing, right? You're just like, I'm seeing this. Huh? So I'm curious, like, just how you relate to your own sense of maybe peace or safety when these images arise up in you, and to not sort of either repress them or defend against them or like do all of this mental gymnastics. It's like you're just seeing images and you're just describing them, which I've been saying to people for ages. It's like, you don't have to, they don't have to mean anything. Just describe them as accurately as possible. Like you don't even have, you don't fucking, that doesn't fucking matter on some level. And for you, like one of the reasons why I feel so good talking to you is that you don't need any of that coaching at all.
Mm.
You just go and we're like, here it is, and I drew a picture of it, and all, and you're like giving me all this extra information about things that I already know, and I'm like, oh, this is fucking fast. This is great. So I'm just curious to drop in a little bit about like how you relate to your own sense of maybe self or sanity or peace or safety when you drop into so-called meditation, and then like you're like, yeah, all these demons are here. And then like there's but they're actually demons. And like, like you have the ability to kind of contextualize it, you know
Mm. Yeah, when you were asking me just now around like how I'm relating as I'm sharing the image, there was definitely like a voice that arose. I was like, uh-oh, am I doing something unethical right now? Like there was kind of like a, should I be
Yeah.
like, yeah. It's like, should I be asking for
Yeah,
consent
yeah.
right now? Like, what am I unleashing? But I think like the truth
Hmm.
of it
Hmm.
is, it feels like the way that like a kid sees like a bee on a flower and is like, there's a bee on the flower. There's like a flower there and there's a bee on it. And I really like that bee, and the bee is fuzzy and it's yellow and black, and the flower like looks like it's blooming, and it kind of looks like a city, and it's in the clouds, and it's it's
Uh-huh.
just reality.
Yep.
So
It's
I'm
just
just kind of,
reality.
yeah.
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 Uh-huh.
But I think
Yeah.
there
And I
is
like it. Yeah. Oh,
a
go ahead.
balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is like a balance between how much are you, yeah, it's like how much am I actually aware of the person in front of me and their readiness to see
Yeah.
reality with me or
Totally.
experience it with me. Yeah.
Right. Like I also feel like you do this thing that a lot of good storytellers or designers do, which is like they kind of take care of you as you kind of step across a bunch of tiny thresholds into the project. You know what I mean? It's like I'll tell you this vague idea, and it's, it's like this movie I saw, like you're giving all of this reference that buffers the reality of what you're actually saying. Because
Mm,
for me as like a person who has had extreme initiatory experiences that are, or are they dreams, or are they real life, it doesn't fucking matter at a certain point, because I've been touched by things that don't exist. And it's like, oh, that's really, so I've had these really extreme, at least to the Western model, very extreme experiences that some might call holy or sacred or mystical or something, paranormal. All these words that sort of are derelationalizing something.
mm,
They're derelationalizing. And in some way that derelationalizing is artistic distance, which is also like, it's like a movie I saw, which is like giving you distance from the fact that like something just touched you, and you're like, I don't know if that's safe, or well, whose voice is talking through me right now. Um, but I just, for me, I'm always listening to these. It's like when I hear people speak, I'm listening to like these, almost like these wells in the ground. Like there's all these holes in the ground, or like shadows that become holes. It's like, is that a rock wall, or can I just fall through it? Because it's like, you know, consciousness just goes, you know, into space, you know. But I'm never, you know, that image that you saw, like when you said when you drop in and gravity kind of does something different, it kind of kalebiyows itself out of normative orientation. It says here's a
mm,
new, here's like normative orientation, but you need the orientation you have when you fall asleep, which is like deep dreaming, where like, orientation's a little different over here. It's a different gravity on the moon, remember? You know.
mm,
But then from that sort of like womb-like cavern of like drop point touchdown, right? Like you touch down somewhere, finally you come into suspension, which is like a new orientating moment. Like you can now orientate, and okay, I'm all my legs and arms here. Like, can I see, smell, sniff? Like you check in with all your senses, right? You're like, what's okay. You know, now I'm here. Okay. But then from that place, you notice, oh, there's a million tunnels. So now it's like a new set of, okay, you're like, wow, okay, so there's a million tunnels. Okay, I have to narrow it down, or I have to like deal with the fact that there's a millions and millions of tunnels. Like I have to deal with that. I'm sort of like in an arterial, I'm in an arterial landscape that like is not just me controlling it, it's already existing here. So that means things can come through the tunnels,
mm,
not just me go, oh, I can go spelunk. It's like, well, maybe that's somebody's house. You don't want to like chill that out. But the listening part for me is where whenever somebody says something and they're really trying to describe something they've felt inside themselves, like they're trying to sort of take a dream and somehow bring it into reality through words, just a little bit. I'm gonna tell you this whole story. It's kind of like this painting I saw. It's kind of like this music. It's like you go, oh, reference association. And for me, I'm always listening, because in each moment of the sharing recognition, there's something real that's actually happening, which is not the
mm,
reference point, right? It's some,
mm,
but the reference point is sort of pointing at what's real. It's like, hey, so, you know, somebody made this great movie because they actually had an experience. And it's all pointing at this sort of drop, these wells, and it's like something's in the fucking well. And I'm the kind of person who's like, I'm bringing my entire reality to bear on the listening situation so that I can hear multiple voices telling multiple stories that are all kind of the same story, but they're
mm,
all coming through you. So it's like quite specific and precious and nice, and it's great. But then there's these moments where I'm like, oh, right, those little fucking Damon kids, those are real people. I've met them multiple times. They're real. I know they're real. I have sense memory of them being real. And in this moment, you're talking about a movie, but I'm just going to go straight to the kids because I know they're real, and I'm going to respect them as animistic spirits that are doing something in the universe really important that is not, you know, like, And I'm also going to listen to them now. Like you're talking, but now I'm, and so I can do that because I've had this wealth of experience that is quite kind of crazy, and I've had to integrate it. But then in the listening, there's this new art form that happens. It's like a new art form that happens because you're crafting the telling, and I'm also crafting the listening on my own behalf, right? And your telling
Mm.
is also a form of listening for you. And then there's all these other beings who are like, how close can you get to the fire without getting burned? You know? We're like, how deep do you think this well actually goes? Like they're like, I don't know if I want to know. Um, and I'm just fascinated by, it's like we do have ethical conundrums when dealing with this kind of stuff. But then also when two people or more than two people have enough something, I don't even know what it is, but enough something, then it's really just fun doing like what that kid is doing. Look, there's a city in the flower. Can't you see it? It's like, oh, you're really inviting me into like something that's quite real. And if someone gives me that invitation, I'm going to take it. Like, because for me, that's where life actually is living. It's like, oh, you just gave me the offer. And if I don't take it, I'm kind of an asshole, like on some like spiritual level, I'm kind of like disregarding something that is real. Um, so
Mm.
I love
Wow.
this, like when it can really be that, what all that shit I just said, that's all mumbo jumbo, but the daemons behind these stories, I never forget that those daemons are actually not, I didn't make those daemons up. I might be making up the story, but I didn't make up the origin of, like, I did, like there's still a lineage that I'm like, well, I have to respect all of these other beings that are like, not, when I didn't make them up. I made up how I described them, but I didn't make up them, you know?
Yes. Yeah. I so fun. Like somatically right now, I'm so aware of like this. Yeah, how if I were to just stay with it, it's like it's like it's like this weird proximity to homecoming that isn't quite there, but there's like something around it where it's like the juicy place in between where I feel like I'm just overly saying something where it's like I just really like you. I'm like noticing how much I like you.
Yeah.
Like, why am I using so many? But it's like,
Right. Because it's
I just
very
really like
vulnerable to
you.
say that. It's like extremely vulnerable to sort of admit that like there's just a kind of joy in liking a person. And I think kids are like this too. Like they don't have a lot of these frames yet of like what it means, negative or positive. They're just like, wow, this is fun. Like this is great.
Yeah, it's like, I
Um,
just want to grab your hand and like pull you over
yeah.
here so we can play and build something together. And it's like, there's a bit of
Totally.
shyness there. And
Yeah.
it's also, let's just play. And there's also kind of like, and then
Right.
you'll say things like the tunnels everywhere. And I'm like, and there's also this like, you get it. You see it too. You see it too. Like you feel it too. You're there. You go there. You go there. And let's go there together. And
Right.
there's like this relaxation that happens in the whole system that's just like, I don't have to explain things. I don't have to caveat it that much. It's just
Yeah.
like, we can just
Right.
go to that. Like it's just there and then we're playing. And I
Right.
think it does like the thing that does, maybe there's like a co-presence of a bit of like, not a bit, there is grief there because shouldn't that be like the way that we interact with all living beings? Like, shouldn't that just be the way
Yeah.
that I'm always like,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about that grief a little because I think the grief and the definitions we have about the grief are actually part of this tangled web that is not, because when I talk about grief or when I touch grief, it's not necessarily only sadness that I'm talking about. It's more like this kind of, it's almost like a self-imposed exile. You know, like the grief of self-imposed exile is actually worse than like if somebody exiles you. Because then you can like have all these stories about like, well, disagreements and like they made a choice. But if you come to the realization that you exiled some part of yourself, well then who the fuck, like what the fuck are you gonna, you know, like there's a real reckoning there. The grief that comes from that kind of thing, I think, is the grief more that I'm talking about. The sadness, the
Mm.
shock, the anger, the resentment, the betrayal, and also the deep like trickster cleverness of like, so did I set this up? Like, was this a setup for some kind of fucking weird wisdom punchline? You know, like it's like, oh, you know, you get these weird, it's almost like you want to puke a little bit, you know, at the top of a roller coaster. You're like, it's fun, but it's also not that much fun. You know,
Mm.
like there's these moments where you're strapped in and you're like, oh shit. And I do feel like the relationality that I'm trying to get people to is an erotic relationality that is not necessarily sexual, right? It's
Mhm.
not necessarily about procreation. It's not necessarily about the kind of intimacy that people talk about when they talk about like intimacy in like the sexualized world. It can be, but the intimacy of play and the erotic intimacy of play and co-designing, which is like, let's dream into this weird thing together and like, oh, shit's happening. I don't know, that feels weird. And then you have to like deal with how fucking sad you are, you know, like the intimacy of the Pandora's box that we're actually opening. Like it is
Mhm.
Pandora's box. It's not necessarily like terrible because on some level you must open Pandora's box. You must. Like you can't go a whole life without opening that box multiple times. And even if you don't, on death's door, you will open the box because it'll just be like the only thing left to do, you know? And I think that when you have enough skill, and I think a lot of the skill is in pausing your runaway train. Because if we were spelunking in a cave, things would be very exciting, but we would have to pause a lot to like orient. It's like, oh, is it dangerous? Can we step there? What do we need? Should we pause? You know, you'd have to do a lot of stopping, pausing, enjoyment, awareness work. And I feel like because we think we're safe in this world, because we have houses or something, um, we tend to go, well, play is just this kind of runaway train. And it's like, no, because if you're really playing, you will come across eros and intimacy on a level that is like heartbreaking. And you will have to be able to pause. And that doesn't mean you stop sensing or being together in that play, but you recognize, like, oh, I just hit something in me. Fuck. And it's so good, but I gotta, you know, titrate this, or I gotta like, I gotta take this side row and like take a lunch break or something, you know? And it's still like, oh, but we're just doodling on a page. It's like, yeah, yeah, no, no, no. We're just talking about a bee and a flower. It's like, yeah, yeah. We're not just talking about a bee and a flower, you know, like, like there's a whole parade of beings sort of looking at us being like, you're gonna make eye contact. Are you gonna make eye contact? Are you gonna see? Are you gonna see yourself being seen? You know, and you're like, I don't know. I think it's better to be like, that's just a rock wall. It's not looking at me. Um, but I do feel the vulnerability of being able to be honest, and then all the games we have to play to just get a little bit more honest with each other.
Mm. Mm.
Right? Because I'm just trying to get, oh, I don't want you to, you know, and I think it's all beautiful. And there's something about being with another person who has enough experience and skill where the relaxation can happen, where like it's never like we're not just constantly stopping at the threshold going, should we open this door? Because both of us are like, yeah, I mean, duh, we're gonna fucking open the door. Like, I mean, like I didn't come here to not open the door, you know what I mean? But if we only go 2 inches into the door, that might be enough. That's fine. But we're not constantly having discussions on the threshold, you know? We're actually like, I'm gonna look in, you know, hold my hand so I don't fall too far. You know what I mean? Like there's a buddy system to it, you know? It's like, I'm gonna go check this out, but it's fucking dangerous. um, and you know, and then from that comes like, I think for me, all the things I lost as a child or that were taken from me, like the sense of innocence and adventure and curiosity and the eroticism that a child has before they are sexualized or even sexualizing themselves on some level. There is a kind of intimacy with reality, imagination, dream, sensory, sensation. And I start to feel that person again who I used to be before all this shit happened. And I have to go, yeah, I mean, that's in some way that's heartbreaking, but also I'm not going to focus just on the heartbreak because it's so joyful to meet them again. So like, why focus on just the bad stuff? I just take it all. Just give me it all. You know, I'll take the tears with the laughter and like whatever, you know, like all at the same time. And for me, yeah, the liking comes from that. Like when I say like, oh yeah, I like you and I like that you like me too, I'm hitting that vein. You know, that is like, oh, this part of the soul that is still existing, that was more present, but I had less skill way back. You know, I had far less skill. Like I was just, you know, just a kid, you know. Um, yeah.
Mm. Oh, yeah. Wow, there's so much. Yeah, I keep having this image of like when like how important the peripheral is, like the side view, like just like just the sideways. I don't know why, but sideways is feeling very much like when something is just too bright, it's just too vibrant, there's like a too muchness to it. It's like intrinsically just like a too muchness. It's like so too much sensation, too much joy, too much pleasure, too much grief, too much like pain, like everything.
Yeah.
Then it's just like the move isn't just like going straight for it. Like there's something that's so like the gunning for it feels so like it feels violent actually.
It is, yeah, I believe so.
Like not even honoring like
Right.
the dance, like it's like the light is dancing all the time.
Right.
So it's I don't know. Yeah, maybe now I'm also having this like I'm feeling into like the shadows that the light casts as well.
Right.
And or like the way like fire when it casts light on like the walls of the cave, it's just like flickering and it's moving and it's casting shapes. And it's not about just like, oh, I want to seek the sun. It's like, no, there's like something here. There's something in that kind of like sacred, just like being by the warmth of the fire and the crackle of it, like the crackle of the wood. And it doesn't need to be anything more than that. It really doesn't need to
No. Yeah.
be more. It's already more. It's already more. So
Yeah.
it's like, why are we always just seeking more? It's just like it's already too much. Like
it's already too
here's
it's
the
already too much.
problem,
Yeah.
basically. It's like it's too much, so I want more. It's like, what? There's something so, yeah, even if you were to take like a logic stance, just like that just doesn't make sense.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's like we dissociate through, we've learned to dissociate, which is to numb out through highly intense feeling, which is like the most counterintuitive thing, I think, in some weird neurobiological way. Because I do think that, like, it's like, I think part of us understands that we can acclimatize or desensitize ourselves to anything by kind of overexposing ourselves to it, like
Yes.
overexposure. It's like, well, if this is too much, well, I'll just fucking overexpose myself to it and then it'll be normal. And I do think that part of our colonial violence structures that we've all inherited are part of this kind of like, well, if it's a good thing, then 10 times more of it's a great thing. And it's like, oh no, this is not wisdom. Now we're in a different territory, because sometimes you need to go hungry to appreciate eating food. Like you have, like there, you really, like it's really real that the oscillation or the diffusion, the diffraction, the interplay, like this theatrical interplay of like, the sun is very hot, so I'm going to go under this tree. Under the tree, the leaves diffuse some of the sunlight. They also make really cool shadows. And now I have like it's an altered space. It's a magical space. There's
Mhm.
like a different world here. It's not as hot. It's still sunny. I can still see things, but it's kind of dark. Oh, well, look at all of this interplay that's happening based on my position. Like I've positioned myself so that I'm getting like a good kind of dosage of the stimulus or the relationship, whatever that is. And for me, I think that's like what theater is at its basis. It's like, let's create a space where even someone just sitting down becomes a kind of like interesting moment. Oh, look at that. Wow, the spotlight and the, oh, well, what do you know? Like, and then they start, so you create these moments of diffusion, right? These filtration moments that are actually not like, it's not about good or bad at this point. It's about like, well, if I put this here and this here and this here, and now we get art making, right? Well, if I take this and I add it to this, oh, look at this now. You're diffusing some kind of intensity into something that is not just less intense, but like kind of the intensity has sort of spread out or changed its shape or like become a different
Mm.
function. And so you're like, oh, yeah, like look at lifing and me interacting. And so the interplay of these intensities, um, and really beginning to enjoy like these small moments of like, yeah, what if I didn't add more? Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Oh, well. There's already more. I didn't add more, and suddenly the more that was already there is speaking to me more. Uh-oh. And I do feel like anyone who's sat in meditation or done any of these kind of mindfulness contemplation tantric exercises, they're asking you to do less to see what's already there, more.
Mm.
And people are like, hell no. People are like, no, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up to be like pure and clean. And it's like, that's not how this fucking works. It's like you
Mm.
peer into the shadow and the shadow peers back and you're like, but there's nothing there. It's like, okay, so look at the nothing longer. Oh no, I can't do that. Why not? Because there's things in there. Yeah, like this, it's almost absurdist, it's like, well, there's nothing there. Yeah, so look at it longer. I can't do that. Why not? It's like I know the answer because it's not nothing, it's something. Um,
Mm. There's this term in Chinese. The words are yogan, and it literally means like flesh tighten, like when your flesh tightens.
hmm.
And it's like when you love something so much, it's like, when someone says like, I love you so much I could eat you, like that kind of
Yeah. Oh,
thing.
yeah, sure.
Um,
Sure,
or
sure.
like it's like how I feel when I like sometimes I'll just like see my cat Meowbot and
Yeah.
she'll just be looking so fucking cute, like so cute. And I can't even handle how cute she is. Like my whole body is just like, it's like doing that flesh tighten thing. It's like, I love you so much. Like, and there's like something in me that wants to consume her, like, or like do some, it's like some energy needs to go somewhere because I just like adore this cat so much. But like the thing that you don't do with something like that is you're not gonna like, I mean, sometimes I pick her up against her will a little bit, but like I
Yeah.
actually treat her with more delicacy. There was like this way in which like it's like I feel so much that it's like I want to pet her even more. Like there's something around it where it you can attune your attention with that intensity where it's like you diffuse it. It's like you diffuse it and it becomes like,
Yes.
rather than you going this way and it's like I need to take you in and have you, it's like, no, now I'm going to diffuse it this way. And now I feel like I'm in this like
Yeah.
orb of just like diffused love for everything, because I'm just so aware of how this very, very specific love for this one being in all of her like cat adorableness is just like, oh, that's like everything. That's, I can just, and it softens everything too. And it's like everything just becomes so soft and diffuse and like, and it's an invitation. It's like those moments are invitations. They're just, and that's all you really get to invite. Like when you feel that intensity, that pang of longing, it doesn't always have to be like, follow that. It's like, no, there's so many orthogonal moves with that energy.
Right. And if we tie this into Gebster, it's like, so the eyes, the nose, and the mouth are all sort of pointed in one direction, right? So we see, it's like we're very like these. So these three organs are very much like what is here, like all the time, like arrows in the way. They're like arrows, pointers. They're very much like what's the way. They're like what's the way. But with the ears and the skin, they're not that way. It's all
Mm.
sideways, 360. And so I often think about moving. It's like, why in theater do we start with like a darkened room? Because the minute you dim the light, you reduce the eyeballs need to, like, you reduce some of this pointing energy and you return some of the skin and hearing energy, so that there's more
Mm.
like already a diffuseness, like, oh, I'm gonna. And even you see people sometimes, they'll like sit in their chair and it's like a dimmed room and they're sitting, but then they start to move back into the chair, right? Because there's less to see. So you don't need to focus on that. And then suddenly all of this sort of blossoms open again, the back body, the side body, all the things that are not just this frontal sagittal oriented reality. And I often think about our ancestors sort of learning theater in forests and caves, because if you spend any time in forests and caves, the soundscape is crazy. Like the 360 soundscape is fucking bonkers, especially when it becomes nighttime. You're like, this is crazy. Like I can't see anything, but there's just a bajillion sounds. And so you have to kind of recede into this oral, like literally, this oracular
Mm.
world, which is like the sound making, the listening world, the song world. And then suddenly all of this new relationality opens up, because you can't consume what you can't see on some level. Like if you can't see your cat's cuteness, but you could hear, let's just say for instance, you could hear or feel it, but you couldn't see it, right? Then that motion of like consumption um is rerouted. It has to,
Mm.
because you don't no longer have that like idea of an option. It becomes rerouted into something, and you're talking about doing it consciously, like going from like, oh my god, this is so good, to being like, can I, can I just like move around it, can I like soften and widen? And so it just helps me recognize like the communication style that we're doing is also this kind of like winding road. Sometimes we walk around a thing for a long time and come back to it. It's very snaky. It's not direct. In some way,
Mm.
it's not direct. I mean, their directness exists because we're constantly going, here's what I'm trying to explain to you, directness. But I think that the ethos of the method, if you could call it that, is this other, this orthogonal or oblique. It's like an oblique method to sort of
Mm.
go somewhere and then go around it. You know, not necessarily go through it.
Oh,
There was a bit of a freeze. But, you know,
yeah. You're back. I'm back.
oh, you're back. I'm back. It was just a little freeze, but we'll
Mm.
see what that's
Mm. I'm just very present. Your image of the Northern Lights or the Aurora Borealis
Mhm.
like reminds me of like it's kind of what it feels like, the sensation of diffuse desire, actually. Like it's because it's very manifold. It's always folding in. It's very, yeah, this is the Gepps word. It's like very diaphanous in its seeking. It's like, because there's still kind of like a directionality to some extent to its path, but the path isn't just one line. The path is, it's like diffused. So it's just like it's across so many different points in space that it's more like lighting up different points. And I find that there's something right now around like how we're relating with wanting and desire right now that's so there's like something about it that just needs to be like so much more porously like felt, and so much more like it's like moving from that like eye gaze like desire to something that's so much more just, oh, it's like this like effervescent like unfoldment, which has its movements too. It's like it has its movements of intensified longing, like when your whole, you can feel it in your animal body. It's like and then it kind of moves into the next, like just like the next posture of like maybe kind of like tragedy and like, oh, I just need to like hold myself and like curl up in bed and feel really sad. And then it's like, oh, now like it just has so many beautiful, like the tragic comedy of like just like world making
Totally.
around desire
Yeah.
is, it's so full. It's just so full. And I
Mhm.
think there, like right now, we just oscillate between being like obsessed with desire or being terrified of desire. And it's just, it's like, and even like so many spiritual or enlightenment paths are also just like terrified of desire. It's like, just get rid of it, get it,
Yeah, yeah,
like shove it under the rug, like get,
yeah.
and yeah, there's just
If we could
this.
only master it, you know, if we could only master it's like, wait, what are we talking about? What are we talking
Yeah.
about here? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what comes, yeah. Like we've talked about this before, but it keeps coming back because it comes back in like the circle of dancing demon children and all of this wonderful shit where it's like the nomadic caravan, the Silk Road, the Mardi Gras parade, um, and parades and festivals in general, where there's a procession, like processionality. But then anytime there's a procession, there's like these arterial offshoots that happen, right? Because there's the people that watch the parade, and then there's the restaurants and the food carts next to the like so and then of course there's the sort of parade, but each part of the parade, depending on where you are, it's a sort of different parade. So
Mm,
people are becoming like a river, but they're also like doing all of this diffusion, and you, depending on where you are at what time, you're going to have a different dream. Like you're going to have a different relationality, a different dream, a different visionary experience or whatever. And you can also hear the overlaps of these different bands. Like the one way in front,
yes.
you can sort of hear the rhythm, but it's not as close as the one over here, and that's a different rhythm. And I feel like we know this intrinsically, the way to metabolize desire, which is not to say obsession or terror, but to actually like, oh, I have to fucking move around in some kind of formation in order to deal with this force that is essentially animating my body. And so the
Mm,
laughing children in the circle, those laughing demons who are laughing, where you're like, so is this creepy or is this joyful? It's like, yeah, 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 yeah. You're close now. Because if you're not, but if it's not a weaving of these things that seem like they're opposites, it's not actually the game that those demon children are trying to play. Because they're trying to get to the place where at any given moment, no one fucking knows. Is this dangerous? Is this joyful? Is this safe? Is this, what the fuck? Is this ecstatic? And and that circle can easily become a parade in which everything can happen. I've
mm,
had dreams where I'm taken to a very old rituals that I've never seen in my life. But anyway, like mobs of clans of people, like, like tribes of people that are living together for a very long time, and they come to a meeting place. So like, let's say 4 or 5 tribes come to this meeting place. Um, so that's about what, 600 to 800 people or something. Okay. So anyway, but the point is that like each tribe will be sort of given a kind of like totem to sort of, this is your totem, your fire, your water, your earth, and your air. It's fucking super basic. But then what they do for all night long is they essentially run in a giant circle at night and make sounds and run and run and run and run. And at a certain point, are they being chased? Are they chasing? Yeah, that's, it doesn't fucking matter. Like they're just in the swoop of this current, hearing all of these sounds and voices and making all these cathartic sounds, and the motion is continually forward, right? Until
mm,
you get to this place, like, because I experienced this in the dream. I was doing the running too. Like they indoctrinated me into this method. They're like, no, this is just the fucking thing. We have to do this, or else we'll go to war with each other. Like it was really clear. Like if we don't do this, the energy will get so pent up, it will become theft and rape and war. Like they
mm,
knew this, and they were like, you know how you deal with it? You get everyone at fucking night and a bunch of drummers, and some people are holding the circle, but then everyone fucking who's just in the tribe, this is what you're gonna do for 10 hours. You're gonna run around the fucking circle at night, and by the time morning comes, all that shitty energy will be metabolized, and you'll all be able to go, oh, okay. Guess I don't need to do that thing I thought I needed to do. And I was like, this is so fucking simple, and to get anyone to fucking do it in this modern age feels like a nightmare. You know what I mean? But I was just left with the joy of being part of this ritual for one dreaming night, where they were like, "Can you feel it? You feel it? Do it and feel it." And then I came out of that being like, right. So like that's essentially the basis of theater. Like there's no other need on some level to have any narrative because the narrative is happening inside of each performer. And the energy is just swirling and dissipating and swirling and condensing and evaporating. And it's doing all the things that water does, right? You know, and air. And then at the end of the day, we're kind of, the washcloth is clean, right? We're cleaned out, like our hearts in some way long out from their kind of intense obsessions with like, if I only just could have 15 more pounds of rice, I would be happy. Like, you fucking know. But in this ritual dream thing, I could feel it all in my heart metabolizing. Like, oh, my need to be rich, my need to be loved, my need to be like all these things that I think I need, my need for connection, my need to be understood, all these things. They were just like coming and going. Like I had no, all I had to do was keep running and making sounds and listening and running. And it was dark. So you're like, imagine running in the dark with a bunch of people running next to you and everyone's kind of like running. And it's like, whoa, this is really cool.
Mm.
And I'm always trying to get, like, I'm on the verge of my own something of like the frustration I have because it's also very hard to get to a place where I feel like I can explain this without like sort of diluting its truth or something. Because I'm also not saying it's going to save anybody. It's like, no, it's like doing the laundry. You kind of have to do the
Yes.
laundry. You like, you have to do a lot. Like, it's not like, oh, it's going to save us. It's like, no, we don't do this kind of hygiene upkeep thing that actually like gets us away from obsession or terror. It's like, oh, just put it in the pot and boil it for 10 hours, you know,
Yeah.
in your own blood, in your own voice. Boil it, boil it, boil it, cook it off, cook it off, cook it off. And then, oh, you're like so calm. And the erotic field has sort of changed because you're no longer trying to, you know, do this thing that we do, hunting and give me. It's like you're just suffused with energy of everyone else doing their own work together. And it's like that to me is like the peacefulness that can come when enough people can even begin to say these kinds of truths to each other without necessarily needing anything to happen, you know?
Yes. I have such a I have such a like playful summary image in my like just present right now as you were
Yeah.
speaking. It's like, you know, a tie-dye party when you make tie-dye shirts. But I
Yeah.
was like feeling into just like the thing that you do with like a tie-dye shirt or like any tie-dye fabric is you do this thing where you like twist up a piece of fabric and then you tie like a little rubber band around and you tie another. So it's like this really tight kind of thing, but then you do it all over. So it becomes this like weird, almost, yeah, like almost like a balloon animal of just
Yeah.
like these little twists everywhere. And then what you do is just like you just dip it in color. Like you, so there's this little like this little like weird sausage rubber band twisty thing of the fabric, and you just like dip it. And you can dip it in red, and it's just like bah, and it
Oh,
just
right.
like fully kind of like dip, like it just colors the entire thing. And you dip another part in it, and it's like green, and you dip another thing, and it's like blue, and you just keep dipping it. And I imagine just like each of those little like twisted up sausage worlds is like so intensely red, you know, it's like everything, it's like the richest red possible or like the most intense blue. And then like, are you able to experience the intensity of being dipped in that much color and then to also be co-present with the fact that like at some point it just like you loosen it, and then there's just like little, you just loosen it and then you just hold it up. But the thing you also have to do first is put it inside of hot water. Like there is like you have to wring out
Mm.
a lot of that color as well. Like, and there's actually like something physical around, you boil it and then you wring it out afterwards, and like all the excess color actually has to just like drip off it. That's what successful tie-dye is. And so you kind of pull it up and it's like, oh, here's like the whole, and you have no idea what it's going to look like. You have like, you're like, is it going to make like a weird pattern? But it's like always the good kind of weird. It's always like a good kind of weird. Even when it's like a failure, it's always kind of good. But I think there's like something around that whole process being something like just like being with all of it at once, like being with all of it at once, like being with the wringing and like the hot water and like the dipping and the twisting and then the unraveling. And it's just like, and then you put it on and you feel like you're some kind of like child hippie, and you're running around, and it's like really fun to wear your cool shirt. So it's just, life is kind of like that, I guess. It's just like you're coloring these shirts and you're wearing them.
Right. And the processing and in each stage of the processing is very alchemical in some way. And you have to kind of leave some part of yourself behind to do it, you know, because it's work. It's like, oh, this is hard, or like, oh, you know, like my expectation has to be left behind, and I just have to kind of enjoy this part of the process or this part of the, oh, okay, you know, like, and oh, you did that with yours, and like, and it's kind of random, but also it is very relational. Like there's so much relationality happening, but it's also like Japanese bathhouses where like everyone's just scrubbing themselves. It's like there's
Yes.
something about that energy where like or like places where people are doing like communal cooking is the same kind of vibe. You're like chopping and throwing and wringing and boiling, and there's all this shit going on. To me, there's like energy there in those places like bathhouses and cooking and tie-dye and probably harvesting and like all sorts of things that we used to do back in the day. There's an energy present there that is kind of its own thing. It's like its own
Yes.
extra thing. It's like you can't necessarily recreate that particular energetic field a different way. Like you like you know,
Mm,
like cooking, if you make everything from scratch, is not the same as cooking but you don't make everything from scratch. It's still cooking, they're similar, you get to eat some food, but the energetic field is totally different. Like you just have a totally different experience of the making, the crafting, the relating. And I have that, you know, desire with theater and performance and ritual and ceremony all being blended together and being like a kind of weird party. But the party is not, the party also has a structure to it, like the stages of making a good tie-dye is a fucking sequence. It's like you do it this way, this is the way you do it. And you can do it slightly different ways, but there is a way to do it. And I think that art making is very interesting because while it's very wide open, it also forms into structures that then can be repeated. And then upon further repetition, new layers are discovered in that repetition.
mm,
And I feel like with speaking and listening and meditating and all this stuff that we're doing in conversation, I also feel like I'm making art on some level. I'm feeling like the conversation is a kind of art praxis, right?
yeah.
I mean, do you feel that way too with the work in general?
I mean, I'm so aware of how the words and languaging that is like we're just kind of scattering them up, like they're floating around. But it's kind of like the photons that light up in that aurora borealis, but there's this underlying shape that's so much more, it's like it's in its own process of like whale like becoming. It's just like I'm feeling the shape of this whale, and like it's making its like just deep whale sound, just and I think
Yes.
and I think that's why I more and more I want, it's like the process of cooking, like the process of tie-dye, like speak acts are just not just like they're just like they are this ritual vessel for something beneath. There's like energy, it's still just energy wanting to move. And then yeah, it's like air is moving through like through my mouth, like some, and somehow my vocal cords are just like changing the vibrations in such a way that I'm just like making these sounds. And for some reason, it's really just air and energy moving, but some like there is like an incantation that's just happening. So I want, it's like I just want all words to be in service to that invisible, like that layer. Everything should just
Yeah.
like not getting caught up in the signifiers, not getting caught up in the like, but what do you mean by whale? Like what do you mean by that? But it's like, no, just like what is it? It's like happening.
Yeah.
It's not about that. Like
Yeah.
stop, go, like just drop
Yeah.
it from there for a little bit, or at the very least like be curious about your desire to constantly like get stuck inside that one little semantic cluster that is just like sounds. It's just sounds and like images.
Right. Right. There's bubbles. There's bubbles and they make cute formations, you know, but then they disappear. But they leave a
Yeah.
residue. But they leave a residue. It's like, okay, so there was a bubble and it left this it left an impact. There's some impact to it. I'm trying, I think, to worm my way towards is this question I had at the very beginning, which is, where do you think this work actually wants to go? And where do you want the work to go? Because I know where I think I want the work to go. And I have an idea about what I think the work might want. Because I think the work is very malleable. I think this way of speaking and listening and having a conversation, it can adapt itself like water to many different containers. I think that that's part of its usefulness, you know. But
Mm.
I'm also particularly interested in um, modeling, shaping, sharing a particular application of this kind of work that actually relieves all of the speakers and listeners in the container of a certain kind of need to do what you just talked about. Constantly make sense. Like the kind of sense making that is actually tyrannical. It's not actually like we didn't really communicate. We just kind of did some other weird dominance thing that was like tyranny, masking as sense making and like understanding. And whereas I'm like, yeah, but when you listen to someone sing a song, everyone fucking knows the lyrics don't really make sense. It's like the emotion and the tone and the images that came up, and it's like, uh-huh. So what so like we already know, like we already know that there can be a way of talking that is much more musically oriented.
Mm.
And can we get to that place where it's not artificial in the sense of like, I am being honest, I am getting closer to the parts of my vulnerability that are painful, but I'm also not like jumping so hard into like a kind of miasma of that. I'm also still obliquely offering it to something else. Like I'm offering it rather than like, let me tell you my story. Okay. Like I'm offering it to the vehicle or the container of the game that we're playing. In the same way that if we did exquisite corpse or any kind of collaborative art making, it's like I make a mark, you make a mark, I make a mark, you make a mark. You just kind of make a mark back and forth, you know. But I'm just to cap this part off is like my request from the spirit of the work is to help me, help you, help everyone really figure out or distill the way that this can be A, more normalized, but B, actually more specific in some way, like to actually get to a certain kind of mood quicker with less explaining and more just like, yeah, you are, it's already, we already know how to do this. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, there's something that wants to be expressed around it's the art and craft. It's the art. Like art really is the right word for it. It's the art of it's like speaking from the like the gestalt grokking. It's so, and there is like a risk to it. It's like if you were to practice it as an art form, like the way you would practice drawing, the way you would practice violin, the way you would practice like improvisation, it's just the art of it is that there's like it's also an expression of beauty and taste. And in that way, that's almost like that's like the sacred tension with the play of it as well. Like the sort of like childlike innocence of like it's kind of easy really for anyone to be like bleh, just like say whatever comes to your mind, like say whatever comes up. But there is something, it's like speak only when you're moved.
Yeah.
Speak only when something wants to be spoken. And when you let that really, really deeply in a sacred way matter, when your voicing is a sacred act, then like for me, the breaking of silence can carry with it the immensity of like creating a world. It's just, it's like every moment of silence is like a pause that where it's just empty, full potential. And then it's like, oh, when I utter something, the utterance is the creation of a world. And that's dancing with the weight, like the unbearable weight and lightness of that is that's like the skill. That's the skill.
Right. Yeah, and the music of that, there's an art, like there is a musicality, I think, to that. And I think we know this in, like, I'm very reluctant to say that this is new in any form. Like in any way, this is not new, except perhaps translating it or bringing it to the way that we Westerners use the English language on a conversational basis. Because theater, music, jazz, all, not all, but like for the most part, I've heard these ideas and these matterings, right? These matterings, these like, no, take take this very seriously, like take this part very seriously. Like if you're not going to take anything else seriously, take this one fucking seriously. Um, and so I've been exposed to this in different contexts. And part of my long and winding search was to try to wonder why it happens more often only in certain contexts, but the rest of our normal life is just kind of filled with noise. Noisy everything, like noisy noise. And meaning making, but it's actually noise making. It's like, I would like my meaning to come with a side of beauty, please. Or like poetry, like I would like something that is more indicative of the cosmic cauldron where these words are even coming from in the first place. Which is to say, unruly, very hard to deal with, powerful, important, and yet not important for any particular reason. Like important as in like the force of importance, like gravity is important. It's like there. Or like
Yes.
decay is important. Like decay is important because things fall apart, and that's important. It's like you don't fix it. It's just a thing that happens. So and the thing that I really enjoyed when you were just speaking, one of them was that you got to something where you were like, the stillness is like, you didn't say like a refresh or a reset, but that's the kind of vibe that I got, which was like, the stillness is this moment of like empty potential. And then the next sound you make after that stillness is another opportunity to both take a risk, but also to create an entire world. And that's like crazy. That's fucked up. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of crazy. And the artist kind of relishes that moment again and again. Like they're like, right, if I just get a new canvas, I get to have this weird experience. And then of course things build up, they layer, but then eventually you have to go, let's let's just get a new canvas here. Like let's just, and for me that's like the meditation of opening the heart mind into emptiness, stillness, void, darkness, whatever, is like there's this moment of like internally everything can just kind of lose its shape. And in that losing of its shape, it actually regains some kind of originary shape, right? Like, oh my God, like, fuck, this is actually, oh yeah, okay. And then in the delightful contact with that process, like, oh, yeah, okay. Then new dreamings seem to appear, like maybe they're memories, maybe they're completely inspirationally new. But then there's this pregnant moment, like suddenly before I speak, I'm pregnant with all the things that might want to be said. I'm like, oh,
Mm.
And like for me, the process of really hitting those beats over and over and over again, like as if they were a formula, like a formulaic structure, um, that to me is like all part of communicating, right? Like, oh yeah, there's the pregnant part where like I just imagine saying something and it does something to the energy. And then right, like I can play with all this like almostness or maybe or like is this what really wants to be said? What would that like I can go into this other um this kind of foyer. It's like a weird foyer, you know? It's like this backstage area. It's like we're not quite on stage yet, but it's like, oh, something. And then I toy with it with like, oh, right. Um,
Yes.
and all of that, like toying with something, but you're seriously toying with it. You're not like, oh, this is unimportant. It's you're like, no, this is, oh, like this kind of tinkering quality of like, oh, maybe if I did that, or like maybe if I, I don't know, like there's all of this, um, the joy in like preparing to make a move, preparing to say something, or to sing something, or to share something. It's like I really enjoy when I can like feel the other person like preparing, a little bit, like, and then constantly checking in and being like, oh, I don't know if I prepared it correctly. Like there's an intimacy there, I think, that is like I'm getting an intimacy from watching somebody else have intimacy with their own self process, right? Um,
Mm.
and that I feel a lot of people are trying to hide that because they're like, well, I don't like feeling like I don't know. And it's like, I mean, I want to see someone not know and risk anyway. That's really the game for me. It's like, I know you don't know. I don't fucking know either. I have no fucking idea. Um, but watching and hearing each person's share, if they're doing all of these things, like if they're juggling
Yeah.
all these balls, it's like watching an improvised monologue, which is like a theatrical moment. But only if they kind of know that like there has to be a little bit of self-awareness in that stew, because then it starts to get you kind of going into like, I don't know, if and I don't know, it's just, but to me it's like, where do we as people get to have enough repetitions and practice spaces? Because like any art form, you need lots of reps. You need
Yes.
lots of reps. Like you don't just become like an expert jazz pianist by like, oh yeah, I learned a song. It's like that's like sure, but like the whole genre requires you to have all of these other practice points where you're like, I'm practicing listening, I'm practicing timing, um, like I'm practicing rhythm. Um, so I feel like what I would want to do with some of this work is to create circles, like little moments where each moment is like a different part of the practice, just so you can kind of fine tune it a little bit. Like
Mm.
to be able to say, here's 20 aspects of this work, there's 30, whatever. We're just going to list them as they're all equal, whatever. And then each time we practice, maybe you just pick one and you say, focus on that one.
Mm.
Well, now we're going to focus on this one, right? Because it's just like any hyper complex art skill. You got to learn so much crap. You got to learn, oh, how do I use the ruler and sharpen the pencil? And now, oh, how do I use an eraser? And there's 50 kinds of erasers,
Yes.
Like there's a million, oh, if you sharpen the pencil this way, it does this, but if you sharpen it that way, it does that. It's like, wait a second, I thought it was just a pencil. It's like, no, but to the artist who uses the pencil to its utmost potential, there's a million options. And I think most people, when they're speaking, they're really bypassing so many options because they've been trained to communicate a certain way. And I don't even think it's that much fun for them. Like, I mean, I had to go through this process of like, yeah, communicating isn't that much fun. But then I watch a performer communicate and I go, they look like so clearly there's a gap between my skill and theirs, right?
Mm. Something just really like when you feel, I don't know, when you feel something just like align itself, it's like the stairs shift or something and the walls move. And I'm like, oh, I realize that there's like this move that one can do. And I realize I've been practicing it, but I've never really framed it this way. And I think you do it all the time and in such micro kind of like infinitesimal moments that it doesn't look like you're doing it. But it's like these like micro deaths. They're like micro deaths. And I like that's kind of like my move when we pause, like, and we drop in. When we drop in together in the beginning of a conversation, and that's like generally how I almost open like every interaction, I actually die. There's like a way in which it's like a mini death where it's like, I just like kind of like drop. It's like I drop away. And then the thing that I'm actually doing, but I'm having much more of a meta awareness now, is that I'm like dropping myself into the black hole. And then I'm like then I'm like almost like bringing myself back. So like when you see me and when I share something like, oh, I'm noticing this and I'm seeing like these little figures and I'm beginning to feel this, it's like I'm just reconstituting reality again, but from the place of dissolution. And there's like this, and that's like kind of the move that is available in every moment, but is like basically bypassed by most people, is that little death. And that little death is such a release because it releases like any fixation on how you're supposed to be, or like this track of like this conversation will go this way. It's like, no, like the linearity of reality can just like through that. It's like you're walking and you just drop through a hole and then now you just pop up somewhere else. And it turns out everything is just made of holes and you can just keep popping this way and going this way and pop this way again, pop this way. And that's like literally every it's like every occasion of experience is just that. Or it can, the potential of it can just like the refinement of it is just getting it down to like, I mean, to be nerdy about it, it'd be like the Planck level version of that. It's like, can it be that? Can every movement just be like an improvised return from like a drop into source and then a return from source? So it's like death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth. And that's like an, I mean, I think I'm also getting your death clown school a lot better now. I'm like, oh yeah, you're like teaching the death because everyone's terrified of death, because you lose control and you lose your sense of who you are and you lose continuity. And that's like terrifying existentially for anyone, because that's like what our entire culture is based on, like continuity of identity. But then like the clowning is like, I feel like I'm just like describing your value proposition right now, but it's like the clowning is like when you go through the black hole, it's like, how do you fucking come back? It's like you can't take yourself that serious. You're both taking yourself very seriously, and you have to not take yourself seriously at all, because you know that whatever you come back as will just like disappear. Like it's like it will return. It's just like another cost. It's like a costume that you're adorning yourself with, and it's sacred and it's important and it has consequences and you have responsibility, but then it dissolves right back. So you have to like clown your
Right.
way into it. It's just, anyway, I think so. I just
You get it. No,
got something
yeah.
that, yeah,
Yeah, you
you're
got something.
you're
You
good.
totally got it. Like you're like this is actually like it's some in some ways what you're saying is like the thing that I can't say because to me it's like very basic. It's like I I I sometimes need to be refreshed about what's happening because I'm just like going, "Oh yeah, but it's this thing that you can just do." Like I mean it's just like the baseline of and people are like, "No, no, but this idea of like it starts with the micro death like a feeling. It starts with a feeling, which is a kind of release of a relief of bullshit. It's like, well, imagine if you just didn't have to constantly reify your history. Wouldn't that be fucking great? Like, just, suddenly you're in a cartoon, right? Like you're in a fucking cartoon where it's like, I don't fucking need to know who these fucking characters are. They're a fucking cartoon. They're not fucking real. If they say something, they can just make up a new thing tomorrow or the world. It's a fucking, it's cartoon logic. It's just like, what is happening? It's a dream. Who gives a shit? But the consequence of the cartoon characters interacting still has an emotional impact. I mean, so and we're also doing that. Like we're looking for signifiers constantly about identity and politics and stuff, right? But on some fucking level, it's all just absurd because I meet people all the time and know nothing about them. You know what I mean? Like I know nothing about them and I'll never know anything about them. And yet we have an interaction and it's fucking real. It's a real fucking interaction. Like, and this thing of like, just playing with like everything falls apart. But then if you have like vital energy or chi or whatever that is animating you, there is an organizing force that will come and sort of the reconstitution will naturally happen. Like the dissolution is the thing we resist, right? We resist this, like, I don't want to fall apart. Well, you don't fucking even know what that means. So let's say that right away. But let's just say you do this micro death meditation and you actually say, I'm falling apart now. Let's enjoy it. Let's enjoy the ride. Boo! And you fall into free fall. If you sit there long enough, because you're not actually like physically dying, and even if you were, something else can happen. Then that's the thing, something else, some animating energy will appear, and you can kind of cobble together this new set of clothes for yourself, knowing that it's all like, yeah, I'm just walking along and there's this hat and I put on this fucking hat. And then 3 minutes later, the bird stole the hat. And like, well, easy come, easy go. Like there is this sense of like, if you get used to this way of being, you can't actually lose anything anymore. But then you also can't gain anything. Like it's very scary because you're like, oh, that means I can't hoard anything anymore either. It's like, yeah, including your fucking identity. Because it's easy come, easy go. Like the more you do this, the more you realize I'm kind of like a puppet for God. And God is like an idea I have that doesn't exist. Like, but I'm still here and you're still here and we might as well make the best of it. Um, And the fun in that is also terrifying at the same time. It's terrifying. Like I'm talking about something that's like totally like the first few 100,000 times I did this, I was oscillating wildly between like intense joy and delight and excitement and terror, like complete total paralytic terror, right? And just sitting in that for hours and being like, well, this is fascinating, and then making a move from that place and seeing what happens. And that's the repetition I had to give myself because society is not really telling you that that's the thing you need to practice. But I
Yes.
do think that every artist knows what I'm talking about. every artist knows what I'm talking about, because if you try to make a new song, you sit in front of the blank canvas and you're like, oh fuck. You're like, oh fuck, this again. Fucking Jesus fucking Christ. You know. Um,
Yes. Yes. And the thing that's like wild about it's like even the limiting it's like the limiting frame we put on art a lot of the time. And when I say we, I mean like culture. It's like the dominant kind of like culture reality tunnel that we're in right now, is that it's like it's like you're making a song, you're making a painting, you're making a theater show. It's like we're still so stuck. And in that way we can also it's like make it smaller. It's like make the significance of what's happening smaller. It's like, oh nice, you're painting a little pretty painting, or you're putting on a little theater show. That's nice. Like we'll put some public funding towards that, but like, you know, a tiny bit. And it's just like, no, literally there's like something in that practice that's like a latent capacity that everyone has access to, which is about reality creation. It's about reality dissolving and then reality creation. And that's like literally everything, like this table, like everything that is here is that. So don't put it in a fucking art school. It's like, it's everything. It's everything.
Right.
So it's so, and I feel like the thing, it's like sometimes even now, I think I'm personally in this phase right now, which is recognizing that like in a weird, in an odd way, it's like the dissolving I kind of get, but it's like the art is in the coming back. The art is in the mark making. The art is in the sitting in front of the blank canvas and being like when you're talking about that foyer is like all of, it's like you're just, from when you were describing that, it was just like being in this subterranean basement under the stage that's just like filled with, like, you're drowning in yarn. Essentially you're just drowning in it, and you're trying to find the right thread. Like you're just trying to find like the right thread in all of it. So you're like, which one do I pick up and then like bring up onto stage and literally speak through and with. And that's like that art of like being in the entanglement of all of it, and knowing that whatever thread you pick up, it's no small thing. It's like whatever show you put on, whatever you're speaking from, it will touch everything else. So if you don't consciously and intentionally do it out of like love, it's like you're going to cause harm, because that's touching everything. So you think that like, yeah, you think that you're kind of in that moment, just like doing something innocuous. Like it's not even that. It's like, it's just all constantly touching. It's all constantly touching.
Right. Right.
And that's the paralysis. That's the paralysis. It's like the moment I make a mark, something changes, like something will change.
Right. And it will. And I think the thing that I keep coming back to is, because we hyper focus in the culture on different aspects of the creation process, you know, whatever you want to call it, like design process, creative process, marketing process, whatever. We hyper focus on certain parts and we totally don't focus on other parts of it, right? And to me, there is this point at which, like, if you set the context correctly in terms of hold on, I gotta close my window. Too much background noise. But if you set the context correctly, which is like in some way stagecraft, like it's a stagecraft process, you know, like you feng shui the space to kind of, before any move is made, sort of like show the underlying entanglement before any move is made, so that the first move that gets made can be highlit in a backdrop of all of the potential moves that did not get made. And even in just that one slice of moment time, that in itself is some kind of reflective story about us choice making, right? Choice making in general, art
Yes.
making, choice making, like why did I go left instead of right? Like there's a million reasons, but the point is that I did go left and not right. Like there is just a thing that I did. Um, and the reason that I enjoy a certain kind of theater or a certain kind of art making that is also theatrical, which is where the process is highlighted in such a way that no action can be hierarchicalized, right? Like no action, like this, the action of doing nothing is just as
Yes.
important as the action of doing something. And if you
Yeah.
can show people that, if you can show people that over and over, like if you can repeatedly expose them to a way of being with choice making that is both poetic, maddening, terrifying, erotic, like it's all of these things at the same fucking time, right? It's like, oh my God. But if you can expose people to this and then invite them into the process somehow, first through witnessing and then through making choices and seeing their ripple effects, right? Because you have to see the impact of an impulse. You have to see the, I did that and now I made this mark and it changed the world. I said this word and it changed the world. If you can give people that in a fun enough, light enough way, repeatedly over time, like iterating the body of a snake through time, right? I think it changes the way that they interact in their normal, mundane, everyday circumstances. Because what theater is it's a distillation. It's like a highly intensified distillation of what you're talking about, which is reality is the process of this fucking like dissolving and reconstituting that then gets filtered through our opposable thumbs and mouths. And then we make IKEA tables out of it or whatever. But the point being is that the underlying substrate that's happening almost like liquid plasma, like the darkness is made of like plasma, right? It's like I'm
Mm.
taking parts of darkness to make darkness, or I'm taking parts of darkness to make light. I'm taking parts of light to make darkness. But it's all just kind of like these suspended molecular, like, whoa, like, and I'm just kind of like scooping the silly putty out of the air and just going, okay, that's what this little silly putty wants to be. And we get caught up in the specifics, but I'm actually interested in the specifics of the non-specific, which
Yes.
is like
Because even that's
that's
theater
the
still.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Because you're like
right,
wearing the little lab coat and you're like, I'm a scientist and I'm picking up this piece of dark matter and combining it here. And there's like something about
yeah,
that, which is in itself like an expression of an impulse already before you decided to put on the lab coat. It's
yes,
like there's like something that's
yeah,
so like when you were describing like the moment, like because impulse is the mark made. Like for me, it's not like it can never come from like oh, like I need to make sure that like this is happening and then this is the right thing. And I'm like figuring out the right move by mapping all the scenarios. And then it's like, this is of course, like I'm going to now put this mark on the page because I've played out the probability scenario of like all the different possible ways it can go. It's like, no, it's like at some point it's like, I'm holding a posture and staying with everything and being intimate with reality. And then it's like, it just
yes,
happens. Like,
yes,
oh.
yeah, right,
It's
and
almost like, how does a whale decide to jump out of water? It's just like when it's just
right,
like,
right,
yeah.
right. I do believe that the entirety of the universe, including like dreams and death realm, like all, just everything you could ever imagine, plus things you can never imagine, the unimaginable and the imaginable, is all this call and response method. It's like a call and response. It's like who did the call and who responded. Well, that's up for debate, and you can debate that forever. But the point I'm trying to make is this: like what you just described is like the same thing as like if someone throws like a beach ball at a little kid, they might not they're not planning on what to do, but they have a reaction. They have a response to the beach ball, whether it's joy or fear or slapping it away. The same thing is like the artist, like I'm being intimate with all reality until some kind of charge is built up. And then there's a thing, and now that changes it's like, okay, and now there's this kind of ping pong effect that keeps happening, right, between like perception
Mm.
and choice making. And I'm really interested in how language, like the way when language is allowed to be what it actually is, right, when language is allowed to be what it actually is and to move through us in this way that is both like maddening, confusing, exhilarating, all of, but when held in a container of listening where like we're not necessarily listening for rightness or wrongness. We're
Mm.
listening because the kindness that we're giving each other and ourselves is part of the practice that we're all yearning for. Is like, can I just be in a space where I can fuck around and find out without it like ruining my life? Like, where is the opportunity to make sounds just for the joy of making sounds, or making worlds and breaking them just because that's a thing we can do? And that to me is like, because I've been percolating with this for a few months since you reached out and talked to me, and being like, this methodology, whatever, this way of communicating is so, it gets at something, it gets at some kind of foundation for art making that is so, I feel, so necessary for people to um,
Mm.
be exposed to and be invited into over and over, but more playfully and more like less about sharing like stories. I mean, it's always that, but less about that and more about like the way an artist learns to draw pictures or learns to sing a song. It's like there's something even more intimate in those moments. Like if you ever watch like a singer learning to sing a song, not like they've already sung it and they like know how to do it, but the learning of how to, like, they're a great singer. They have the skills, like they hit the fucking high, whatever. That's not the point. The point is that that being is meeting the entity of the song and their body at the same moment and the time that they're in, creating a kind of special moment in time, like in XYZ axis. And then in that moment, open to whatever the fuck happens. And the learning of the song is like, well, I didn't expect that lyric to bring out those emotions. Like the unexpected occurs in the learning of the doing, not necessarily the repeating of the finished product. And I
Mm.
find it so valuable to try to find videos of artists in process rather than like, here's my
Mm.
process, I'm doing the show for you. It's like, no, no, no. Can I see where you were rehearsing? Can I see the B-roll where you screwed up? Because actually, it's in some way better than the show for me personally, because I learned so much more from watching someone hit these moments of complete and utter like free fall where they don't fucking know. Like they might even forget how to make sounds. Like they're like a great singer, but something about the lyric and that tone on the piano, and they don't even fucking know how to talk anymore. And I'm like, oh, this is magical. Because if you can kind of distance yourself from taking that too personally, it's like it brings tears to my eyes because it's so beautiful to be like, it got me. And to show
Mm.
people how it got you. You're like,
Mm.
fuck. And that, this, I believe that the process we're trying to engage in, whether we're doing, I still feel like I'm trying, um, hints at these possibilities for me. Like it hints at like if we just change, like just a few, like you need to walk down that tunnel a little bit longer. I know you don't want to, but maybe you should. Like there's these moments in here where I'm like still, creating safety, still like, being friendly with Cheryl. But then there's these other moments where I'm like, something else is trying to say, there's another room down here. There's and another and another and another, but you still need whatever you need to get, to just listen a little bit more.
Oh, yeah. When you're describing the other room, the deeper rooms, the deeper spaces, I don't know why, but I was like, I know. I know what they're talking about. I know that place. I try, it's like that, oh, that place.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, so it's like an infinite place too. But it's like the place where I think I just, because it just like came up, it's like the place where when I'm there, I feel like even my breathing disturbs. It's like even my breathing disturbs the air at at a place of such depth that it will like it will change the cosmos. It's just like such a, I don't know how to describe it. It's like the place where when I drop there, I feel immobilized at times. Like it's like even now I can't speak from, it's like I actually can't speak from that place, truthfully. It's like when I'm there I can't speak because it's like whatever I speak in that place will be imprinted in such a way that I can't, it's like I have to, it's so sacred that I have to be okay that whatever sound I make in that place will just like glob out towards some kind of like, I need to, it's like I need to trust something that much that I can utter it in that place. And I haven't yet.
Oh, yeah. I
I
mean,
haven't even.
I'm with you on the fact that like, so the place that I think we're talking about is the place where the only way you can make a move in that place is to sort of, it's non-conscious. It's like there's something about the conscious looking and trying to understand it that actually prevents us from being intimate with it. Like that's what I've learned is like that moment is happening kind of all around, but the only way I truly align with it is if I'm in enough of like a flow state or a trance state or an I don't give a fuck state. Like something has to break in my control. Some part of the ego, some part of the mind, some part of the self has to kind of like give up the ghost on some level. And I've seen that in like there's this black musician Theaster Gates out of Chicago, and he's part of like a band called the Black Monks of Mississippi, and they do these kind of like improvised jazz gospel circles, and they get to this place. They do, it's like it's improvised, but it's also devised, and they've also rehearsed, but like they get to places where they're completely channeling something else, and then they come back and they have to like take a break or something because like they're like channeling ancestral voices, and it's like, but did they plan on doing that? No, because they're riding a wave until the wave rides them, and then suddenly it's like, oh shit, we're both in an artistic process that's also a ceremonial praxis of relating, and everyone's feeling it differently. So there's no like, well, they're doing it and they're not. It's like, no, 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 no. There's no, they're like, no, it's the nexus of these people's hearts creating a kind of web that then allows them to have different experiences of this same numinous thing, right? But for me as an audience like member witnessing these people in video or whatever on sonically, it's like a tone shift. It's like you can feel the artist negotiating with something, and then there's a moment where there's no longer negotiation, and that's the moment where like the person's like singing but they're crying, and it's like they're not in full control anymore. They're absolutely not. They're being ridden by this mother wave, and it's only going to last a short period of time, and everyone knows that it will end because we can't sustain the contact. It's not that it can't, it's that we can't sustain the immensity of what is happening. So it will have to tone itself down eventually. But there are these moments of like, it's like everyone's breathing the whole time, but then there's a special kind of breathing where like something else, it's like, oh my God, where did all this extra lung room come from? It's like, right, because it's not material in that way. It's like literally all the cells of your lungs suddenly had more capacity. It's not like you gain, like they just remembered. And then there's like a feeling of like, did I just grow 3 inches? Like what just happened? It's like, right, this is the thing. And I don't think they can get there. They don't get there on command, but they know enough about creating the condition for it to peek through the window.
Yes.
And this is the thing that I'm trying to figure out is like, how do we as artists, because essentially we're like artist priests at this point, and priest is a kind of dirty word, but like it's real enough for me to be like, well, this is what the ancestors did, and they didn't have any distinction. They're just like, everyone's kind of like an artist priest, But then how can we in this modern era do what Theaster and the Black Monks do in our own ways, in our own forms, to get people to have these moments of like, and they're going to have it and it'll make a mark. It's going to make a mark. And then you look at the entire process differently after you have that experience. You go, oh shit. And then you have to take a break, like you probably have to take a break because you're going to fucking cry your guts out,
Yes.
Like
I'm just saying yes a lot.
Yeah.
Yes. Because I can feel it, like as you were describing that too, it's like I can feel the gyre of it. Like when that happens, it's like when something opens in that way through that person or through like a group, it's like when it's just like tuned in that way, it's like, it's almost like the eye of the universe just opens up. And it's so interesting because like the gravity of it is such that like the intent, like if when there's an audience and they're listening, it's like everything just moves into the still point. Like everyone moves to the still point at the same time. And no one's just like, oh, what's happening right now? It's like, you're just there. You're like there. And then you come back and you're like, what the fuck? What was that? But it's like, you're there. And that's just so, it's like, honestly, I think I just want to name it, even though it feels so audacious to name, but it's like the longing that I feel towards like the collective numinous in that way. It's like that awareness where it's like it's not like this it's not even intentionality anymore. There's no intentionality around it. It's just like by grace, it's everything just like, it's like, and everything just comes right here. And you're just gathered in, and it changes everything, the whole axis of the cosmos, like changes in that moment, and something happens in that moment. And I'm like, and I know it sounds so ridiculous, but I'm like, that's like literally the only way we can get out of this situation. Like, it's like, whatever that means. It's like when we're talking about the meta crisis, or like, oh my God, ecological crisis. Oh my God, we need to fix AI, blah, 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 blah. It's like, it's not, you can't look at it like that. It's like something else you have to
Right.
open. It's like this,
Right.
like a very, very,
Yeah.
it's like the opposite from the thing that makes you want to contract around fixing. It's the opposite from
It's
that.
the
It's
opposite.
just,
Yeah. Right.
yeah.
And for me, it is like it's a biological and social technology. But because of the nature of that, is like you can't necessarily like you can't necessarily de-implicate yourself from it, right? Like you can't
Mm.
de-implicate. You can be like, well, I'll make a device that does it for me. It's like, no, no, no. You have to learn how to create the condition in your literal body, your literal nervous system, your actual like lived experience, your perception, like all the things that are in you. It's a skill that can be learned and in some way must be relearned, not just by individuals, but by collective groups, because that's the only way this particular flavor of it actually functions, like as a tech. It's like a cosmo tech, you know? It's like, and like, it's like Miss Tech, you know, like mystical, but it's like, for me, it's not really about power, because if you really witness artists or, you know, priests or anybody who's like doing this, it's like gaining more power is like the least possible thing you can do at that moment. Like there's literally like a loss of the self that needs that or thinks that like, well, if I don't, what if I can't pay my rent next month? It's like, it in that moment, because I've had some of these moments, it's like in that moment you could care less about any of that stuff, because the actual like shifting of the axis, the actual opening of that eye is enough to sustain your soul for like eons on some level. You know, like on some level you're
Mm.
like, oh, this is why I do what I do, because like this is the thing. And if you haven't given yourself to that conditionality yet, like the relationality of that, you're still thinking of it in these other weird terms. Well, how do I get there? Like, who's going to help me? Like, yeah, yeah, well, yeah. But the thing that I'm saying is, which I think you understand, and I think a lot of listeners will understand, is that like this tuning that can happen with a small group of people that actually like kind of can get out of their own way and just do the artwork or make the full, like whatever the art is. If it's talking, we'll just say it's talking. If it's singing, if it's, you know, painting, if it's theater, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is like everyone is now asking what the scene or the moment needs from me, not what
Mm.
I need from the moment, you know? Like what does this circle as a kind of theatrical cosmos need from me in the moment? And the more we make those kinds of choices, the more that this potential surprise opportunity can occur, which is like, I'm riding the wave, I'm riding the wave, I'm riding the wave. Oh, I'm not riding the wave anymore, but it's not like the bad kind of not riding the wave. It's the kind of like the tables have turned, you know? The tables have turned and now the art is
Yes.
making us, and we have to just go, yeah, I feel some shit about this. But in those luminous, numinous moments, like it's like the most grounded I've ever felt. Like I don't need to run away from anything, and I also don't really need to fuck it. I don't really need much other than to keep being in relationship with that force, right? Because
Yes.
to me it becomes like, why am I doing all this death clowning? Why am I doing all this micro deathing? Why am I practicing? Well, it's to actually get into a real rhythm with this other force or this opening that can happen, so that I can actually be like playing with that force, like,
Yes.
well, I'm going to play with you now. And in that mode, oh man, I'm just like, I gain liberation from the self that I constantly I'm reminding myself of, you know? Because it's like, God, it's so annoying to kind of be like this person all the time, you know? Like in those moments, that person it exists, but is not like taking up all the space, you know?
Yes. Yeah, there's almost this, like when there's like a true, when there's that kind of like it's, I always call it an encounter. And I still like, I'm gonna keep using my handle of the black hole. It's like when you encounter the black hole, like true mystery, like mystery, it is, it's really interesting because like
So there was a glitch there, and that's fine. So we'll just sort of like start to wrap it up for folks. You didn't really, I don't think you missed anything, but yeah, Cheryl, you were sharing something about incantation again, I think.
hmm, yeah, the it's like to go back to your example of like the musicians inside, let's just say inside a bar and they're playing and then they like tap into that place. They're like at in the place and everyone in the room, like even if you don't know what that place is, it's like something in you recognizes it. It's like something in you is like, oh, home. Like you get it. And that's why you're so drawn in. And that's why you lose yourself, like yourself dissolves. And I think there's like something, there's some kind of move that's so critical, like as an ethos. It's like it's like an ethical move as an artist, which is in that moment, like as the musician, as like the person on the stage, to not have, to not take it on as like, I am the portal. And to not let others, like, it's like the right affordances that are set up around the art making and the process and the theater setup where there is no audience. It's like everyone's in it. Everyone's actually participating in the music that's being created and in the portal that's opening. And that same door is actually available in them. And I think that's just like something from an ethics perspective that's so critical around this kind of like distributed portal making, you could call it, or like ritual container building, is that not, and that's like, I think that's where the practice of collective presencing feels like it's not, yeah, and everything is still kind of like a pastiche. Like I feel like I'm like drawing from soul making and like art making and collective presencing and like all like what, and then like I put a bunch of words on it, like so that I can just try to kind of show the absurdity of trying to make gestures towards something that is like a quality without a name. But I think like ultimately it's recognizing that, like with collective presencing, when you're sitting in circle and you're relating with being spoken through or being moved by, you recognize that like just because one person is speaking in that given moment doesn't mean that that person is the channel. It's like everyone's channeling around, like everyone's channeling through the middle. So it's like for example, a sermon. It's like if someone's giving a sermon, it's like a sermon that's distributed across like 30 different bodies, taking on different parts of that. It's like I say a sentence here, you say a sentence there, you do like a movement over here, and it's just this wave that's moving through each person. But it requires this like improvisation and coherence and like attunement and listening to each other, so that you know that
Right.
you're like picking up the resonance in such a way that there is like a continuity that's about beauty. It's a continuity that's like about beauty. It's not about what's right or what is, yeah, the correct way of doing it. It's about like adding adding your notes so that it's more beautiful. I don't know. I think there's something, yeah, just like the ethics of this type of work feels really important to me when we're trying to open up mystery and democratize it. I'm not sure if I can. You're breaking up a little bit there. I can hear you.
Okay, so we're gonna call it, but okay, to be continued, because always to be continued, because there's clearly something happening with my internet connection, which is, it happens sometimes. But yes, to everything we've saying and more, I really want to keep exploring this with you. I want to stop the recording just so that we can
Yeah.
say that we stopped the recording. Okay. So we're gonna stop the recording and then we'll say our goodbyes. So.